From the 3ABN Worship Center, it's the 10 Commandments Weekend 2009. Ancient words, ever true.
Well, we're so happy that you could join back with us for this hour number 6 of our 10 Commandment Weekend. And we have nearly every seat. In fact, I'm sure every seat is taken here. Some people may be just away from their seats temporarily. And we have an overflow group here in Thompsonville at the Worship Center for this beautiful 10 Commandments weekend. And we're looking forward to this hour number 6 where the 4th commandment will be presented. And this commandment is going to be presented by Dr. Joanne Davidson. And Dr. Davidson is at the Seventh-day Adventist Theological Seminary, which is located at Andrews University in Berrien Springs, Michigan. And she has a specialty in Old Testament. She understands the Sabbath about as well as anyone I have ever visited with. And we have heard her as a speaker at many great convocations around the world and in the church. And I most remember when she spoke to us at the General Conference session in St. Louis. And so we're going to be looking forward to hearing this message today by Dr. Joanne Davidson. But before she comes, John Lomacane is going to come for us. John, the pastor of the Thompsonville Seventh-day Adventist Church and the ambassador at large for Three Angels Broadcasting Network, will come and sing for us, I'd Rather Have Jesus Than Anything This World Affords Today. Thanks, John.
I'd rather have Jesus than silver or gold. I'd rather be His than have riches untold. I'd rather have Jesus than houses or land. I'd rather be led by His nail-pierced hand than to be the king of a vast domain, or be held in sin's dread sway. I'd rather have Jesus than anything this world affords today. Would you rather have Jesus than worldwide fame? Would you rather be true to His holy name? Would you rather have Jesus than man's applause? Would you rather be faithful to His dear cause than to be the king of a vast domain, or be held in sin's this world affords today, and to be the King of the vast domain, or be held by sin's dread sway. I'd much rather have my Jesus than anything this world can afford today. Would you rather have Jesus than anything this world affords today? Than this world can afford today.
Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, your manservant, nor your maidservant, nor your stranger, nor your cattle that is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that in them is, and he rested on the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Those words were spoken by God from a mountain, and that day remains one of the most extraordinary days in human history. Mount Sinai was covered with fire. It was convulsing like a volcano, with lightning and peals of thunder echoing off the surrounding granite peaks. Sinai was covered with thick darkness. The scene was so awesome that Moses, who had often communed with God, quaked and trembled. That day is described in Exodus 19 this way. Now Mount Sinai was all in smoke, because the Lord descended on it in fire, and the smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked violently. When the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him with thunder. Then the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain. Yes, Mount Sinai was ablaze with lightning. There was thunder and smoke and the piercing, shrill sound of the heavenly shofar, all indicative of the very presence of God himself. And because it was such an overwhelming day, many people believe that when God spoke, it was the initial presentation of the Ten Commandments, the first time anyone knew anything about them. It was the very first time God revealed his sacred law code. And it's not hard to think why some people might feel that way. However, there are numerous hints all through the book of Genesis and the early chapters of Exodus that the commandments on Mount Sinai were not so much a new law as a majestic, authoritative presentation of already existing principles. Let's briefly review a few of these hints about the Sabbath commandment alone. The Bible opens in Genesis with a majestic description of God creating the world in 6 days. Then we are told, Genesis 2, thus the heavens and the earth were completed, and all their hosts. And on the seventh day, God completed his work which he has done, and rested on the seventh day from his work which he had done. And then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he rested from all his work which God created and made. 3 times the phrase, the seventh day, is repeated. In the 4th commandment of the Decalogue, the same identification of the very same day is given, repeated, linking us back to creation week. Notice also included in the statement of the fourth commandment in Exodus 20, are this reminder of those three verbs God used as he created the first Sabbath day. God himself refers to those same verbs as he gives the fourth commandment. And it is highly significant that connected with the seventh day is the point that it's the only day with a name. All the other days are numbered, but Sabbath has a name. And then it said that God blessed the day, and he rested on the day, and he made it holy. He made it holy. Now, none of the other 6 days is blessed by God. What does it mean to be blessed by God? Well, we have to let Scripture define its own terms. And so when we trace the word blessing all through Scripture, we notice that when God blesses something, he enables it to fulfill the function for which it was set up. And God had already blessed humans and animals on day 5 and day 6 of creation week. And now on day 7, he does something extraordinary. He blesses time. When God rested, he wasn't sighing, saying, "Phew, I'm sure glad that's over." No, the original language of God resting implies a feeling of deep satisfaction. God was resting in joy at something he had done. You know, like when you complete a task yourself, I like to make bread. And some days it turns out and some days it doesn't. But some days it does. And when you come and it comes out of the oven and the house is full of the smell and the job is done, you say, "Ah, that's good." And that was the feeling God had as he made the earth. You know, he finished it all and he said, and he rested in great satisfaction. God also made the Sabbath holy. How does God make something holy? Now, the very first thing God makes holy in all of Scripture is time. See, God could have made a holy mountain or a holy tree or a holy cave or a holy city where people would have to come to be close to him. But instead, he takes 24 hours and makes that holy so that wherever you are in the world, you can enter the Sabbath. In fact, one Jewish writer was so impressed by this fact that he calls Sabbath a palace in time. A palace in time. Now, I don't live in a palace just yet, but I've seen a documentary of Queen Elizabeth in her Buckingham Palace. And I could get used to that. But you know, God, as my creator, made me a palace. A palace in time, where every 7 days I can enter this royal palace. Now, how does God make something holy? Some kind of a hocus-pocus, mysterious thing? No, let's trace how God makes things holy in the Bible and let the Bible define itself. Remember earlier when Moses had been in the wilderness and he saw a burning bush. Now, things burning in the wilderness wouldn't have been unusual, but Moses sees a bush is burning, but it's not burning up. And that was unusual. So he goes up to see it, and the very first thing God tells Moses about himself is, "Moses, take off your shoes. This is holy ground." Now, how did God make the ground holy? His very presence. When he was right there, and the bush and the surrounding ground becomes holy because God is there. Later, when God sanctifies the sanctuary, how does he make that sanctified and holy? He enters it with his presence in such an amazing way that no one can even get near it. It's so full of his presence. So how does God make the Sabbath holy? He enters it with his presence in a very special way. Oh, yes, he's with us every day. Of course he's with us. But on Sabbath, he enters these 24 hours in an extraordinary way. And Ellen White says he gives us his choicest blessings. The description of the first Sabbath is laden with these three verbs. Have you noticed that there's more verbs connected with the creation of the Sabbath than any of the other 6 days? The other 6 days, God just did it and it was done. But the Sabbath, he blessed it, and he rested, and he made it holy. And then he takes those 3 same verbs when he gives the fourth commandment and repeats them again, linking us back to his very first Sabbath, that he did these amazing things to that very first Sabbath day. Now, the rest of the book of Genesis reminds us that the 7-day week cycle continues through history. There's several different places where the Genesis text is punctuated with the weekly cycle, reminding us that God set it in place, and it just still keeps going. See, God's the God of space and time. And he shows his full power by not only creating the world in 6 days, then he created the seventh day, and he took those 7 days and he bent it into a week that has stood in all continents, with all people groups in all history. Because God is the God of space and time. Now later, before Israel got to Sinai, but after they were delivered from slavery in Egypt, God brings them into the wilderness and they run out of food and they're so worried. And so God, what does he do? He provides some miracle food. Miracle meals. He starts providing the manna, which a psalmist later refers to as angels' food. These divinely miraculous meals again marked off the 7-day cycle. You remember that? Notice how many miracles are connected with the manna. Well, 6 days the manna came, enough for every person, but if you kept any extra, it would spoil, right? And on Friday, the second miracle, a double portion of manna fell. And if you kept extra, it didn't spoil, right? The fourth miracle is on Sabbath there was no manna. Not because God didn't care, but because I don't want you to have to work. And you don't want you to have to worry about daily tasks. And so there was no miracle manna on Sabbath. And then the fifth miracle, this was precisely done for 40 years. See, Sabbath is a day for miracles. We've got to remember that. And when in the wilderness some people went out on that first Sabbath to gather manna, what did God say? Do you remember? God said, how long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? Now God hadn't even given his law on Mount Sinai yet, right? So what's he talking about here? These are some of these hints that are embedded in the Bible that remind us that the 10 Commandments were not new information on Mount Sinai. On Mount Sinai. Instead, God tells Israel, why do you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? Now, God could have said, why won't you obey me? I explained this all to you. But no, God refers to his commandments and his laws that were already operating even before they got to Mount Sinai, right? And so the text goes on in Exodus 16. So the people rested on the seventh day. Hadn't even gotten the 10 Commandments yet. Another reminder that the Sabbath was not instituted as something new at Mount Sinai. Well, after the manna miracle started in Exodus 16, the people of God finally end up at Mount Sinai. And there at the mountain of God, they hear God proclaiming his law. Let's look briefly at the 10 Commandments. You know that our Hebrew brothers and sisters call them the 10 words because they're so much shorter in the original language. You know, it takes us 4 words, thou shalt not kill, in English. It only takes 2 words in Hebrew. It takes us 5 words, thou shalt not commit adultery, in English. It only takes 2 words in Hebrew. So you can imagine the 10 Commandments are much shorter in the original language, but until you get to the 4th commandment. God starts talking about the Sabbath and he just can't stop. He loves this day. Over a third of all the words of the 10 Commandments are in the 4th commandment. And God just fully identifies himself with this day. The first word, remember, reminds us that the Sabbath wasn't new. God said, remember. Remember. In fact, one writer puts it, it's like God putting his heart on his sleeve. He's in heaven saying, oh, will you remember? I have such dreams for this day. Will you remember? And God himself, all through the 4th commandment, refers back to that first Sabbath that he created and draws in those 3 wonderful verbs by which he establishes Sabbath and ties it right in to the 4th commandment. The other Bible writers, once the rest of the Bible writers were called to write scripture, they couldn't get over creation. They couldn't get over it. Every Bible writer refers to it. And the Psalms especially are full of it. Remember, let all the earth fear the Lord. Let the inhabitants of the world stand in awe of him. For he spoke and it was done. He commanded and it stood fast. I mean, creation week was such an amazing thing. Remember what God tells Job? Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth, when all the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? I mean, creation week was extraordinary. Not only when God made 6 days of matter, but the 7th day he made holy time. What a creator. Jeremiah couldn't get over it. I like what he writes. But the Lord is the true God. He is the everlasting King, the living God.
Thus you shall say, the gods that have not made the heavens and the earth shall perish from the earth. But he made the earth by his power, and he has established the world by his wisdom. Oh, creation, our Creator and Creation Week are so extraordinary. And God couldn't get over it, and he ties it right into the fourth commandment, taking our minds back to that very first week on this earth. Well, when we come to the New Testament, when God walks on earth, Jesus himself regularly speaks of the Sabbath, of the law. For example, remember when he told the rich young ruler, if you wish to enter into life, keep the commandments. See, the commandments were never intended to be a straitjacket, a burden. It's the way of life and freedom. And then Jesus, he honors the Sabbath in a way you can't imagine. Well, the first thing he does is announce his public ministry on Sabbath, right? Remember, for 30 years he was a carpenter, and he waited until God called him time to enter his public ministry. Turn to Luke chapter 4. Jesus announces his public ministry on Sabbath morning in church. Wouldn't you like to have been there that morning? And Jesus comes there, and I love it, Luke 4:16. He came to Nazareth where he had been brought up, and as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and began to read. Don't you love that phrase? As his custom was. God, the creator of heaven and earth, the creator of the Sabbath, as his custom was, he loved to be in church on Sabbath. And he's coming back to his hometown synagogue, right? Nazareth, where he grew up. And he stood up to read, and he was handed the prophet Isaiah. And when he opened the book, he found the place where it was written. And he's reading in church that morning, the scripture reading. Because the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, and to preach the acceptable year of the Lord. Now, the people of Israel had been listening to these promises of the Messiah for hundreds of years. These are from the book of Isaiah. And the people of Israel still today, every 3 years or every 5 years, read through the whole Old Testament and worship on Sabbath morning. They work from Genesis to Exodus, Leviticus, and through all the Bible books through the Old Testament. And this Sabbath morning, they were in Isaiah, apparently. And there was that prophecy of the Messiah. And Jesus starts reading it with the feeling of, and fulfilling the words that these people have been waiting to hear fulfilled for hundreds of years, wanting the Messiah to come. Verse 20, he closed the book and gave it back to the attendant and sat down, and the eyes of all who were in the synagogue were fixed on him. And he began to say to them, today, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing. What a Sabbath. He announces the coming of the Messiah in his public work that morning. And what was the response? So all bore witness to him in the marvelous, gracious words he spoke. And they said, isn't this Joseph's son? Huh? We saw this kid grow up here, work in the carpenter shop. Huh? And it began to be very hard for people to know that they knew Jesus as a man, but to know Jesus as God was hard, because Jesus was so closely identified with us. Well, Jesus announces his public ministry on Sabbath. And then he proceeds to go and fulfill all these promises of the Messiah in his Sabbath miracles. Now, Jesus performed miracles every day of the week, but you know, Ellen White says he performed more miracles on Sabbath than any other day of the week. See, the Sabbath is a day for miracles. It's a day for miracles. And Jesus, and the Gospels record 7 Sabbath miracles. Let's look at them briefly and see what we can learn about the Sabbath from the Creator himself. His first Sabbath miracle starts at Luke chapter 4, verse 31. We'll look at the collection of them in Luke, even though we could look other places because they're all handily lined up here. Luke 4:31, he went down to the Capernaum and was preaching to them on the Sabbath. There's that little clue again that Jesus was always preaching on the Sabbath. Jesus loved the Sabbath. And they were astonished at his teaching, for his word was with authority. Now in the synagogue there was a man who had the spirit of an unclean demon, and he cried out with a loud voice, saying, "Let us alone! What do we have to do with you, Jesus of Nazareth? Did you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Now, my parents were missionaries when I grew up in the Far East, and I've seen people possessed of demons, and it's ugly. Their voices are distorted, their eyes bulge, and their mouth is foaming. It's a horrible sight. Satan works differently in this country. He's far more sophisticated and hard to recognize, but he's very real. And notice, the people who are having trouble recognizing who Jesus was, but not the demons. I know who you are, the Holy One of God. And notice the demons know prophecy. Are you come to destroy us? They know their end. But that Sabbath morning, as they were sitting in the church, this demon-possessed man comes in and disrupts everything. Can you imagine? But Jesus shows who's in full authority. He rebuked him, saying, "Be quiet and come out of here." Him. And when the demon had thrown him in their midst, it came out and did not hurt him. And they were amazed and said among themselves, "What word is this? For with authority and power he commands the unclean spirits, and they come out." Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath, and he's still Lord of heaven and earth. Second Sabbath miracle. Right after that, they went to lunch. And he went from the synagogue, verse 38, and entered Simon's house. But Simon's wife's mother was sick with a high fever, and they made request of him concerning her. So he stood over her and rebuked the fever, and it left her. And immediately she arose and served them. See, Jesus can rebuke fevers. My dad was a physician before he died, and I remember him coming home so frustrated when he couldn't help somebody. And he loved this verse of Jesus. He says, "Oh, I wish that I could just rebuke this disease like Jesus could." But Jesus is going to do that someday, isn't he? He's showing us a preview of what he can do. And he rebuked this fever on a Sabbath. They didn't make her wait till after Sabbath. He worked a Sabbath miracle right there, because Sabbath is a day for miracles. The next Sabbath miracle is in Luke chapter 6. Another Sabbath miracle, our third one of the 7 we have in the Gospels. Happened on the Sabbath that he went out to the grain fields. Well, let's skip down to the miracle. We'll look at the grain fields incident a little later. Verse 6, now it happened on another Sabbath. He entered the synagogue and taught. And that's how all his Sabbath miracles are. He entered the synagogue and taught. Jesus loved Sabbath and to teach about God on the Sabbath. And the scribes and Pharisees watched him closely to see what he would do, because a man had come in with a withered hand. Now it says of this man's hand in the original language that his hand was Xerox. What do you think of when you hear the word Xerox? Copy machine, yeah? So what does a man's dried up hand and a copy machine have in common? Well, you remember before the Xerox machine, copies had to be done with wet ink. Remember those mimeograph machines and printers, and they had to be careful that the ink didn't blur or smudge, and so they had to wait to make sure the ink dried, and they kept getting faster and faster drying ink. But finally someone invented powdered ink. Have you ever filled the toner of a Xerox machine? It's black powder. And that's why you can make copies so fast. You don't have to wait for the ink to dry. And so this man's hand was dry. That's what it means. His hand was dry, which means withered or dried up or useless. And he came in and maybe had it under his coat because he, when you're physically challenged, it's a little bit embarrassing. You don't like people to be the first thing they notice about you. So maybe he had his hand covered. And notice the drama begins. The scribes and Pharisees wanted to see what Jesus would do. But Jesus knew their thoughts. And when Mark records this miracle, he says, Jesus knew their thoughts and looked at them with anger. And he said to the man with the withered hand, I'll see you after church in a Sabbath school room and heal you, because I'll get in trouble if I do it now. No. Jesus interrupted his teaching. And right in the middle of the service, he tells the man, arise and stand up here. And so the man stood up. Did you suppose he was wondering what was going to happen? And Jesus said to them, I will ask you one thing. Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil? To save life or to destroy it? When Mark tells this miracle, he tells that the presiding clergy of the day were already planning how they could kill Jesus, because he was not fitting their mold of a Messiah. And Jesus, knowing that, draws attention to the 10 Commandments, and he said, you're planning murder, and I'm healing a man. Who is breaking the commandments? Who's breaking the commandments? And after asking this question and getting everyone to think, he tells the man, stretch out your hand. And the man's hand was healed and restored. What if he hadn't come to church that Sabbath? What if he hadn't come? And verse 11 says, and they rejoiced and sang praise hymns to God for an hour. No. They were filled with rage and discussed with one another what they might do to Jesus. And Mark says, to destroy him. See, we can be so focused on our wrong ideas about Sabbath that we may miss the miracle. Sabbath is a day for miracles. That's what God intended. And I like the way one Jewish writer puts it. If all we think about on Sabbath is what we should and should not do, as important as they are, we have never yet entered the joy of the Sabbath. Because the Sabbath is a day for miracles. Turn to Luke 13. Another Sabbath miracle. This is of a crippled lady. Now, this crippled lady was probably a single woman, because there's a rare person that will marry a crippled lady. So, but notice she's in church. Have you noticed how many times maybe you get up in the morning and you have a stomach ache or a headache? Well, I think I'll stay home today. Well, this crippled lady, she couldn't stand up straight, so she was bent over double. She recognized people by their shoes. She never saw anybody's face. Oh, I remember those shoes. Hi, happy Sabbath. She couldn't stand up straight, but there she was in church. I love this lady. And again, notice what Jesus is doing. Verse 10, he was teaching in one of the synagogues on Sabbath. You hear that little refrain? Jesus loved to be in church on Sabbath teaching. And there was a woman who had a spirit of infirmity, 18 years. It's a long time to have a crippled back. And she was bent over, no way could raise her up. But Jesus saw her. He was teaching, remember. He called her to him and said, woman, you are loosed from your infirmity. And he laid his hands on her, and immediately she was made straight. And she glorified God. I love this picture. See, Jesus could have just said, you're healed. But he laid his hand on that crippled back and removed the indignity of her crippledness by his healing touch too. See, touch is so important. We always see Jesus' hands busy, don't we? Touching even lepers and the sick. And physicians and psychologists are just beginning to understand the healing nature of the human touch. And how long this lady had gone without a hug, who knows? But when Jesus saw her, he interrupts the worship service to restore her, because Sabbath is a day for miracles. And so what happens? The ruler of the synagogue shouts out, we must praise God for this glorious miracle. No, he answers with indignation, because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath. And he said to the crowd, there are 6 days on which men ought to work. Therefore come and be healed on them and not on the Sabbath. As if healing for Jesus is work. Remember, Jesus says several times, I'm working like my Father works. Bringing healing and restoration to everybody that wants it. And then the Lord answered him and said, verse 15, hypocrite. Have you ever wanted to say that to somebody? We can't do it, though, because we don't know hearts, do we? Someone may look like a hypocrite to us, but we can't read hearts. And so we can't do that. But Jesus is God. And he knew that this man, this presiding elder's sentiments came from a hypocritical heart. And so what does he do? He asks a question. Does not each one of you on the Sabbath loose his ox or his donkey from the stall and lead it away and water it? So not ought this woman, being a daughter of Abraham, who Satan is bound, think of it, for 18 years, be loosed from this bond on the Sabbath. Now remember, the fourth commandment says that the animals are included in the blessing of the Sabbath. Remember? We said it at the very beginning. All the cattle, even your animals, are included in the Sabbath blessing. Isn't that beautiful? We could spend the rest of the hour talking about how much God loves animals and how sensitive he is to their needs. But that's not what we're here for, so we'll just leave it at that. But he did include it in the fourth commandment. And so Jesus knows that, and he said, listen, you would loose your ox and take it to water on Sabbath. Most of us probably haven't lived on a farm and know how much trouble it might be to take an ox to water. That's a heavy animal. If they don't want to drink, and you know they need to drink because you're going to be gone the rest of the day, it might be quite a job. But Jesus says that's right. Animals deserve to be comfortable on the Sabbath. You would do that. You would loose your ox and take it to water. Ought not this woman who's been bound with this infirmity for 18 years be loosed on the Sabbath and made whole and comfortable on the Sabbath. See, Sabbath is a day for miracles. And when he said these things, all his adversaries were put to shame, and the multitude rejoiced for the glorious things that were done by him. Well, there's another Sabbath miracle in Luke chapter 14. This is another one at Sabbath lunch. Now it happened, he went to the house of one of the rulers of the Pharisees to eat bread on the Sabbath, and they watched him closely. And behold, there was a certain man who had dropsy. And Jesus answering spoke to the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? Now Luke, who was a physician, didn't include a lot of details about this dropsy, so we don't know exactly what condition it was. But in Jesus' time, the rabbis had an idea. And you can read it in their ancient writings that if you're good and not a sinner, the blood and the water in your veins will be evenly balanced. But if you're a sinner, but you do only a minor sin, the water will ascend the blood and you will have dropsy. But if you commit a very serious sin, the blood will be higher than the water, and then you'll get leprosy. And so they determined that any sickness was a matter of this person sinning. So here's this man with dropsy. And Jesus answered and spoke to the lawyers, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? But they kept silent. So he took him and healed him and let him go. Then he answered them. He didn't just let it go at that. He started trying to get them to think again. And he answered them, saying, which of you, having a donkey or an ox that has fallen into a pit, will not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day? Now, see, he ups the intensity here. The last time he refers to animals, he talks about just leading them to water. That'd be hard enough if you had a stubborn ox. But now he's talking about the real life in Israel. Israel has very little rain, and they've learned not to waste a drop. And rather than when they have excess rain that just runs off the ground into the sewer like we do in this country, they have devised means of saving every drop of water. It never just runs off and is wasted. And they build these big cisterns in the ground, big pits. They're big as rooms. But you have to be very careful to keep them covered with a stone or a protection, or people can fall in. And apparently that was something would happen occasionally, because Jesus refers to that. And he talks about one of you having an ox fallen into a pit will not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day. Well, if you think it's hard to take an ox to water on the Sabbath, try pulling an ox out of a deep pit on the Sabbath day. That would be very hard work. But Jesus says appropriate on the Sabbath. Even animals are included in the fourth commandment. And you recognize that. That's appropriate. How so much more human beings deserve to be made comfortable and healed on the Sabbath day. And they couldn't answer him. They had no answer. See, Jesus didn't just heal on the Sabbath. He always drew the miracle to the center of attention and asked probing questions, hoping people would start thinking about what the true Sabbath is all about. Let's go to the Gospel of John for the last two miracles. The Gospel of John, John 5 first. The paralyzed man. The paralyzed man at the pool of Bethesda. Ellen White describes this miracle, and she says that on a Sabbath afternoon, Jesus was walking through Jerusalem, and he saw by the pool of Bethesda many, many very sick people. And she said his heart went out to them, and he would have loved to have healed them all, but he knew that would cause such an uproar that he would immediately lose his life. So he had to refrain himself from his mercy. Isn't that something? But she says he saw one particularly pathetic case. And she said his heart went out. So he comes up to the man. Verse 5, John 5, verse 5. There's a certain man who had been with an infirmity 38 years. It's a long time. And when Jesus saw him lying there and knew he'd been in that condition a long time, he said to him, do you want to be made well? Well, the man hadn't a clue who was talking to him, so he described his situation to him. Described why he was there and what was going on. Well, Jesus listened to him, but then he just simply says to him in verse 8, rise, take up your bed and walk. And immediately the man was made well, took up his bed and walked, and only now does John tell us it was the Sabbath. The Jews therefore said to him who was cured, it is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to carry your bed. Do you see what's going on here? Jesus could have saved himself a lot of trouble by telling the man, rise up and walk. But he says, rise, take up your bed and walk. And so the man, after being sick for 38 years, has a bed on his shoulder, his mat on his shoulders, and probably jumping and leaping and praising God through the streets of Jerusalem. Did it draw attention? See, Jesus could have saved himself a lot of trouble by just telling this man to go home and be well. But Jesus deliberately tries again to provoke attention to the Sabbath day, doesn't he? And it worked. They said, why are you carrying your bed? And the man still doesn't know who Jesus is. And he said, well, the man who made me well told me to take up my bed and walk. And they said to him, who is the man that told you to take up your bed and walk? That phrase, take up your bed and walk, repeated over and over and over again, which makes us know it's the important point of this narrative. But the one who was healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn a multitude being in that place. Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple. He was praising God and said to him, see, you have been made well. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you. Now, with this clue, we understand when Jesus talked to this man that this man's condition was a result of his own sinfulness, right? And he had done wrong that had caused this debilitating disease. But you notice that Jesus didn't withdraw from him and refuse to heal him? See, we've got to have the attitude of the Messiah towards the people of the world. Yes, many of us do things that cause us trouble, but, you know, Jesus has mercy. And on the Sabbath day, he restored this man whose sickness was his own fault. It was his own fault, and Jesus knew it. And Jesus sought him out, and his heart went out and healed him. And not only that, he drew attention to the miracle by telling the man to carry his bed and walk through the downtown streets of Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. How many people do you think were carrying their beds that Sabbath? Not many, only one. And it worked. It drew attention to this great, great miracle. One more miracle John gives us. The seventh Sabbath miracle, John chapter 9. The man born blind. Now, as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned? This man or his parents that he was born blind? See, we're always wondering, who sinned? People haven't changed. I think anybody that's blind, that has to have been a terrible sin somewhere that caused that, right? But notice Jesus' answer. Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. So as differentiating this miracle from the miracle of the pool of Bethesda, where the man had caused his own sickness, we have a man now who's blind from birth, and it wasn't caused by anybody's sin. We've got to keep those ideas clear in our minds. And then Jesus goes on to say, I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. There's that wonderful phrase, working. Jesus is working on the Sabbath. Like Ellen White says, he's pouring out his choicest blessings on the Sabbath. And he says, that's what my Father does. I'm doing the same work that my Father does. And as long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. And when he'd said these things, he spat on the ground, made clay with his saliva, and anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. Then he said, go wash in the pool of Siloam. So he went and washed and came back seeing. But we mustn't miss the important details of this narrative. See, in those days, the Jewish people had revered the Sabbath. And they loved the Sabbath. They still do. And the Sabbath was so precious to them that they decided they better build a fence around the Sabbath so nothing could harm it. And then they thought, well, wait a minute. Maybe someone will break through this fence and harm the Sabbath. Let's build a fence around the fence so that no one can break through the fence that's protecting the Sabbath. Well, then someone thought, well, maybe that's not enough. Maybe we should build a fence around the fences. And they kept building fences to protect the fences that finally they weren't even protecting the Sabbath anymore. They were protecting their fences. And Jesus came and he tried to restore the Sabbath in its true beauty and glory to his people. And so he provokes their attention by asking questions and doing things on the Sabbath to make them think through again what Sabbath is all about. And in this case, when he gathers up some clay, the Jewish clergy of his day would say he would be plowing. And so he was already breaking the Sabbath. And then he anointed the man's eyes with this, it was like an ointment, it was kind of a medicinal thing. And see that by this time in late Judaism, the clergy had decided that if a person was critically ill, really near death, you could do whatever it takes to heal them. whatever treatment, whatever work it takes. But now if a person just has a chronic condition that could wait for another day, then you mustn't work to help them. Now, a person born blind, would that be critical or chronic condition? Yeah, if he's born blind, been blind that long, he could wait another day, Jesus. But Jesus comes to this man who's born blind, caused not by his own sin, and he takes up a little soil and he puts ointment on his eyes, and then he tells him, go wash at home in your sink. No, he says, go wash in the pool of Siloam. Now remember your Jerusalem geography. Where's the pool of Siloam? Right by the temple. Ooh, it's where they got the water for the water ceremonies. Is this provocative or what? How many people do you suppose were at the pool of Siloam washing on Sabbath? Nobody. And here comes this man with this ointment on his eyes, you know, feeling his way. And he gets to the pool of Siloam. Maybe someone helped him, and he washes his eyes, and he can see. And let me tell you, people were watching, because look what happens. Therefore the neighbors and those who previously had seen him blind said, is this who sat and was blind? And some said, yeah, that's he. And others said, no, it's someone like him. And the blind man said, I am he. Therefore they said to him, how are your eyes opened? And he said, a man, Jesus, made clay, anointed my eyes, and said to me, go wash in the pool of Siloam. And so I went and washed, and I received my sight. And they said, where is he? And he says, I don't even know. He hadn't even seen him yet. So they brought the man who was formerly blind to the Pharisees. And now John tells us again, now it was the Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. So the Pharisees asked the blind man, how did you receive your sight? And he said to them, he put clay on my eyes, and I wash and I see. Therefore the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath. Others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such miracles? And there was a division among them. So they said to the blind men again, after they finished arguing for a while, what do you say about him, because he opened your eyes? And the man said, he's a prophet. But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been born blind and received his sight. So they called the parents and they said, is this your son? And they said, yes, this is our son. And they said, was he really born blind? And they said, yes, this is really our son, and he was really born blind. And they said, well, how can he can see? But his parents said, we know this is our son. We know he was born blind. But by what means he now sees we do not know, or who opened his eyes we do not know. He is of age, ask him. He will speak for himself. Now we get this little comment from John. His parents said these things because they feared the Jews, the clergy. For they had agreed already, if anyone confessed that Jesus was the Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents says, he's of age, ask him. So they called again the man who was blind and said, give God the glory. We know this man is a sinner. And the blind man said, whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know. Though I was blind, now I see. And they said to him again, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And he said, I told you already, and you did not listen. Why? Do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples? So they reviled him and said, you are his disciple. We are Moses' disciples. And the man said to them, why, this is a marvelous thing, that you do not know where he is from, and yet he has opened my eyes. Now we know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, he hears him. Surely the world, since the world began, it has been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of the blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. Now remember, go back to the beginning of Luke here, where Jesus announced his public ministry. Remember? He said the Messiah is going to come. He read for those promises from Isaiah. When the Messiah comes, he's going to free the captives, restore sight to the blind. And Jesus proceeded to take all those promises of the power of the Messiah and fulfill them on Sabbath, including healing someone who had been blind. They answered him and said, you were completely born in sin, and you are now teaching us. And they cast him out. See, we can be so wrapped up in our ideas of Sabbath, we may miss miracles. We may miss miracles. We may miss what God is trying to do and what He is doing in us because we have our own ideas about Sabbath rather than the biblical ideas of the Sabbath. Jesus heard they had cast him out, and when he found him, he said to him, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" And he answered and said, "Who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him?" And Jesus said, "You have both seen him, and it is he who is talking with you." Then the man said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshiped him. See, when you really see who Jesus is, you have to worship. And we have two miracles here, two miracles of sight. First, Jesus gives this man his physical eyesight, and he doesn't even know who Jesus is. But then Jesus comes to him again and tells him who he is, and now the man receives his spiritual eyesight. And he finally can see who Jesus really is, and when he does that, what happens? He has to worship him. You know this line here, "One thing I know, I was blind and now I see," impressed a songwriter so much. He put that little phrase in the song Amazing Grace. "Once I was blind and now I see." Jesus fulfills the promises of the Messiah that he mentions from Isaiah as he announces his ministry in every one of his Sabbath miracles. When Jesus was on earth, he says, "When you have seen me, you've seen the Father." And the Father promised that when the Messiah would come, he would loose captives, restore sight to the blind, and help give good news to the brokenhearted. And then, remember, he says, "Come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." And that's not just talking about a nap, because you see the word that's in the Gospels. There's Sabbath incidents on both sides of that statement. So we know that Jesus is talking about Sabbath rest, referring to the very rest God had that very first Sabbath, that he would give it to us. And he not only does, he says, "I want to give you rest unto your souls." I'm not talking about a half an hour cat nap. I'm talking about a deep rest of peace in the Lord of the Sabbath. Because see, that's what Jesus calls the Sabbath, doesn't he? All through the Old Testament, Jesus refers to the Sabbath and he calls it my holy day. This is my day, my day, my day, over and over again, all through the Old Testament. And when it comes to the period when Israel was falling into apostasy and not honoring the Lord of the Sabbath, God says to his prophets, "I hate your Sabbaths." Now, were they keeping the right day? Oh, yes, they were. They were keeping the right day, but they hadn't got the point. See, the Sabbath is not a matter of us doing everything right for God. The Sabbath is a gift from God that he gives us every week. It's a gift. And we can be so wrapped up in our own ideas like the Pharisees were in Jesus' day, we may miss the miracles that are going around all around us. And Jesus, as he walked on this for 3 years, it's all the world could take of him before they killed him. But over and over again, he drew attention. He said, "To my holy day." And then he calls himself, "I'm the Lord of the Sabbath." And he shows by what he does what Sabbath is all about, reminding us what he even did in the Old Testament. The Sabbath is a day for miracles and restoration. After Jesus' work on earth was done, his hands were stretched out on a cross, and he cries out in victory, "It is finished." And he finishes his great work of salvation. And then do you know what he did? He rested on the Sabbath. Just as when he finished creation week, he rested on the Sabbath, his first great work. And now when he finishes his second great work of salvation, he rests on the Sabbath. Beautiful picture, beautiful picture. And Isaiah and Revelation both remind us from the Old and the New Testament that as they look into the future, that heaven itself will include the blessing of the Sabbath. And so the Bible, from creation to recreation in Revelation, reminds us that the Sabbath comes to us like the gift of salvation. There's nothing we do to earn it. It's God's free gift.